we need to deal with so much of our everyday life tasks, and those tasks, they accumulate. Right? So we need to deal today with much more than what we had to deal, say, 50 years ago. Most of us are experiencing, to some extent, cognitive and emotional overload. Too much is happening. We don't have the resources to work with all that information.
Now we're human. When you break down that word, hu means light, and man comes from the root Sanskrit word manas, and manas means mind. So when we say we're human, we're saying I'm a light mind. And what is the function of the mind? It's to think. And there's more beyond just our mundane thoughts that we have, or the thoughts of suffering that we have. And so I give that ability for us to experience the vastness and the expansion of the mind.
Hi, and welcome back to Proven, Healing Breakthroughs Backed by Science. I'm Nick Palizzi, and tonight we're going to dive into what many consider to be the central processing unit of your body. Emerson Pugh, one of the pioneering scientists behind the world's earliest computers at IBM, once said, "If the human brain were so simple that we could understand it, we would be so simple that we couldn't." The good news is that we've traveled light years in our understanding of how the gray matter between your ears operates, and new discoveries are being made all the time. But before we can fully understand what it takes to nurture and heal our brain, we need to upgrade the lens we've been looking at this vital organ through. For centuries, modern science was convinced that your brain, aka the head honcho, aka the boss in the penthouse suite up on the top floor of the skyscraper, our body, was alone at the helm, giving all the orders. And according to the old science, the only things that could positively or negatively impact the health of your brain were toxins, lack of oxygen, lack of food and water, blunt trauma, degenerative disease, and the aging process in general. Well, in walks a few facts that toppled that belief system in short order. 1, the scientific validation of certain complementary and alternative medicines that are highly beneficial to the brain and nervous system. 2, the discovery of the human microbiome, and that disturbances here directly cause brain-related disease. 3, proof that the Western diet is lacking in proper nutrition and also contains toxins, which can lead to negative effects on cognitive function and other systems. 4, proof that vital neurotransmitters, hormones, and macronutrients are produced in the gut. And 5, a paradigm shift in the way that modern medicine now understands the connection between gut health and mental health. When investigating our 5 proven therapies that boost brain health, we did a ton of research, as always, but even though we were armed with much of the healing gold before tracking down the experts in tonight's episode, we were stunned, in a good way, by the knowledge they shared with us. And I have a feeling you will be too. Without further ado, let's jump in. We start with a new discovery in human health that is changing the way we think about a number of different diseases and organ systems, especially brain function. In our first brain solution, we're going to be exploring 2 very important phenomena. The first is something known as the gut-brain connection. What does it mean? Well, it turns out that our brain isn't always the one telling our body what to do. Oftentimes, it's the other way around. There's a powerful information highway known as the vagus nerve, which, along with bacteria and other microbes in our gut, sends signals and instructions to our brain. These can dramatically change the way we think and feel, for better or worse. Secondly, you'll be hearing about a commonly misunderstood condition known as leaky gut, which can affect a number of the vital processes in our body. One of the big ones being brain function. This disorder can wreak havoc within you, and get this, the majority of people who have it don't even know they do. How could something that's happening in our torso have such a dramatic impact on our cognitive function? And more importantly, how can you fix it? That's where we're going in tonight's episode.
We became very brain-centric about 20, 30 years ago. We're like, wow, here it is. This is the central processing unit of all of it. So this is the bee's knees, that's the CEO, everyone else works for the brain. And we're realizing that it's far, more complex than that. The brain-gut connection is very intricate, and there is a constant feedback loop from the nervous system, the gut-associated lymphatic tissue within our guts with our brains.
For every one message from the brain going down to the gut, telling the gut what to do, there are 9 messages from the gut going up to the brain, telling the brain what to do.
So you have to understand how the gut works. It's layers to the gut. The outside layer is basically this mucus lining, which is actually part of protection. And that mucus lining is where all the good bacteria like to live. Then you have just one cell layer thick, just one cell layer between us and the outside world. And so you need those layers intact. Understanding that's helpful because if that gets off track, for example, my antibiotics, my antacids, take out that mucus layer. The extra stress that I was carrying tends to make that layer a little bit what they call leaky or impermeable, meaning it doesn't stay tight.
Leaky gut is when the holes get too big and stuff gets through that shouldn't, and then it causes inflammation and it can become a vicious feedback loop.
Every dysfunction of the brain, depression, anxiety, brain fog, schizophrenia, bipolar, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, they are all diseases of inflammation. Every one of them. The brain's on fire. The markers you look for in testing for the leaky gut, those markers are the same markers in the brain. So if you have elevated antibodies that say you got leaky gut, by definition, you got a leaky brain. The scientists call it a breach of the blood-brain barrier. There has to be a compromise allowing some molecules to get in. And then we have 4 different immune systems in our body, and the most powerful one is the one in your brain. Those immune cells are called glial cells, and they fire the bazookas. It's great. But when we have continual breach of the blood-brain barrier, continual leaky brain, and the glial cells are firing bazookas every day, the collateral damage that occurs from all that inflammation, depending on your genetic vulnerability, that's depression, that's anxiety, that's bipolar, that's eventual Alzheimer's. It just depends on where your genetic vulnerability is as to where it manifests.
So inflammation in my brain was a migraine, but if you're older, it might be that you sort of lose a couple of notches on cognition. So for every chronic illness, I sort of see the same pattern of some form of inflammation that's really working its way, more systemically. If lifestyles don't change, if diet doesn't change, if life just keeps burdening with more stressors and more inflammatory triggers, then you just carry a burden that becomes a chronic illness. At a cellular level, it's that you push inflammation that changes the way your cells communicate to each other, which might change the way your genes start expressing themselves. And all of a sudden, we're dealing with a chronic disease happening at age 40.
Rates of Alzheimer's are skyrocketing. By the age of 85, the average American has a 50% chance of having Alzheimer's already. Everyone I know who's over the age of 50 or 60 is afraid of Alzheimer's. And certainly a lot of us are afraid of it happening to our parents, our spouses, our loved ones. Your Alzheimer's starts about 30 years before onset of symptoms. That's when the brain's impact starts to set in. And the good news is that wherever you are in your journey, if you're able to hear me right now and you can understand what I'm saying, then there's a lot you can do.
It all depends on where you're starting. So if you have been very functional and now you're noticing your executive function sort of slipping, those situations, you certainly can start changing that rate of decline in terms of basically preventing inflammation in your brain. Some of these older folks, who've already marched down that road of inflammation and they've got signs of that already in the brain atrophy, plaques in the brain. It's hard to return them, mostly because it takes good brain function to follow through on a lifestyle that's going to keep your brain healthy. But you can absolutely have, a lifestyle that maybe decreases the decline. So that maybe, instead of going to a nursing home right away, maybe you can keep some neurotropic supports and stimulate the brain in a way so that they can at least not fall and not have any of these other risk factors of morbidity that'll affect, the family and how, what they have to do in terms of caring for a mother or a father. It's hard to turn that around, mostly because it takes good brain health to live a healthy brain life.
To rebuild a healthy gut, first you have to stop throwing gasoline on the fire. The most inflammatory triggers for disease are what's on the end of your fork. So you have to identify where are the inflammatory triggers coming from.
When you eat a lot of sugar and white flour and processed junk, then you are feeding certain bacteria that like to eat, guess what? Sugar and white flour and processed junk. When you eat sugar, you're gonna crave sugar. And guess what? The same is true in reverse. When you eat broccoli, when you eat kale, when you eat cabbage and carrots and onions and garlic, when you eat mushrooms, when you eat the foods that are the best for you, consistently and regularly, your saliva changes to actually find it more palatable. Kale will stop tasting bitter and start tasting sweet. Your body changes, your stomach changes. It is actually possible to crave broccoli. Now that might sound crazy to some folks, but it's literally true. It can happen to you. Everyone's talking about gut health, the microbiome. It's kind of like the new tofu. The truth is that I think that the microbiome may be one of the most compelling new frontiers of science. There are so many little critters in our bodies that literally make us who we are. They produce the neurotransmitters that keep our brain happy and healthy. They digest our food for us. They actually are a fundamental part of who we are, and they have more genetic material than we do in our own bodies. And so learning to understand what those critters are and how they function and how to nurture the good ones and maybe keep the bad ones in check is pretty important. It's critical to your mental function, to your heart health, to your happiness, to your mental peace and ease.
You are what you eat. And more specifically, when it comes to brain health, your brain is what your brain eats. And so there's certain types of nutrients that the brain just thrives on. One of the major building blocks of the brain and nervous system is fat. The brain is comprised of 60% fat. And so there's some nutrients that when you want to optimize brain health, those are things that you want to look at. So things like DHA and EPA found in fish oils, and things such as MCT oil found high levels in coconut oil. In addition, when we talk about fats, we also want to make sure that not only are you getting the omega-3 fats, which are fantastic for brain health, as well as lowering inflammation, you want to look at other types of fats such as monounsaturated fats, so things like olive oil, fantastic for brain health, especially if you get olive oil that's organic, extra virgin olive oil, because it's really chock full of antioxidants as well. And so the thing with fats is they can become rancid pretty easily. And so when you eat foods such as olive oil that's produced by olives that are organic, the olives themselves, as they go through their growth cycle, if they're organic and there's no pesticides on it, what ends up happening is they're a lot more vulnerable to the environment. But that's actually a great thing, because the more stress the olive is placed under, the more stress-fighting compounds it produces. So compounds such as polyphenols and antioxidants that when we ingest them, not only help the olive survive, but help our brains and our bodies work a lot better.
You have to rebuild the microbiome to a healthier microbiome. First, when you go shopping, buy vegetables, always buy organic. Buy every root vegetable in the store. Not every one, but every type of root vegetable in the store. Get rutabagas and turnips and parsnips and radishes and sweet potatoes and carrots. And every day you have one root vegetable. And you alternate them every day, because the fiber in those root vegetables feed the good bacteria in your gut. You don't want to just eat carrots every day. Some carrots are good, but you want to alternate them because they all feed different bacteria.
Feed the good guys and not the bad guys. This is critically important. And the critical thing here is fiber. See, good bacteria in your gut feast on fiber. That's what they need to eat. There's soluble fiber and insoluble fiber, and there are a lot of different kinds of fiber. The more the better across the board in general. And of course, there are some that are better for certain types of bacteria than others. The top fabulous kinds of fiber are contained in the foods like Jerusalem artichokes and acacia fiber. You'll find them in jicama, amazing fiber-rich food. Apples are great, onions, garlic, and all of these things are best off in their raw form for the optimal fiber composition. But if you eat them cooked, so be it, still be good for you. And then also all of the leafy greens, amazing sources of fiber. And when you get enough fiber, you're feeding the good guys, and then they feast, and then they reproduce, and then they grow, and they crave more good stuff, and you create a positive feedback loop.
Then you go to that great library in the sky, Google, and you type in list of prebiotic foods. Print out the list, and you put on your refrigerator, and every day you have 2 from the list and 1 root vegetable, and you'll be surprised to see a banana is a prebiotic. Then, for 2 months, I want you to take a prebiotic supplement, because we're transitioning your lifestyle into a lifestyle that's going to feed your good guys, but we also want to make sure right now you're getting enough of the food so the good guys can thrive. So a couple of months, take the supplement. Next, get 5 different types of fermented vegetables. Sauerkraut, kimchi, miso, fermented beets, curry flavored, whatever you like, but get 5 different types. Every day, you have a forkful of one of the fermented vegetables. Why? Because the fermentation process produces hundreds of families of beneficial bacteria, the good guys.
And then they help you digest your food better, and they help you get the neurotransmitters to your brain better, which can bring down rates of mental illness and depression and anxiety and stress. You'll have more peace, more ease, and more joy. It all starts with the microbiome. Nourish the good guys, eat the fiber, have lots and lots and lots and lots, and did I say lots, of vegetables, and you will reap the benefits.
So we just touched on nutrition and its many benefits for our gut-brain connection. Now we're going to dive into a sister category that has a ton of research to support it. I'm talking about medicinal herbs. Until the end of the last century, modern medicine viewed herbs as fairy tale folk medicine. But over the past few decades, scientists have been able to study many of the more well-known healing plants, often used in numerous cultures for the exact same conditions. This is where an ethnopharmacologist, or someone who studies the medicinal use of plants in specific regions, usually begins their hunt for a new medicine. They dial into traditional remedies that have been embraced by large groups of people for a long period of time and see if there's an active compound that can be extracted and synthesized into pill form. As you're about to find out, the research is conclusive on some specific brain herbs that are extremely powerful and safe to use.
My path to wellness started growing up in a family that had a long lineage of wellness practices, even though it was not called wellness then. So I'm a 13th generation family farmer out of a small Northern European country called Finland. And growing up at our farm, that was a path where it started. We showered in spring water, ate berries, had our own ferments. Again, it was not called wellness, it was just life.
Many of our pharmaceutical medications, not the majority, but a significant minority, are derived from the natural world. Researchers at drug companies still look to the natural world to find new drugs. Ethnobotanists will work with often indigenous people looking for plants as an initial source of plant drugs. But one of the other things that they do now is they do what is known as bioprospecting, and they'll go back and they'll look at old herbals, which of course there's no copyright, there's no issue of having to share it with anybody.
So when you start to look at these indigenous cultures and heritage, like in my case, Finland, there's things like nettle, sea buckthorn, rhodiola, chaga that have like a big cultural importance to us, to the point that like Vikings would take rhodiola before going to battle. And then scientific community starts to look into them and they find these compounds like rosavins, and it's like, oh, there's something here that works. So like, yeah, there is.
So yes, there is definitely a interest in the natural world supplying things, but at the same time, drug companies aren't interested in herbal products as herbal products. There is no interest because there's not the level of money. Again, patentability is an issue. And so what they're looking for is unique molecules, which they can then turn into something. On the other hand, there are some standardized extracts like ginkgo. Most of our listeners will hear and have heard that ginkgo is a traditional Chinese medicine. Ginkgo leaf is not a traditional Chinese medicine. Ginkgo seeds have been traditionally used in Chinese medicine after extensive processing because they have some toxicity as both a food and a medicine. But ginkgo leaf, there is no traditional use for ginkgo leaf. And in fact, a German phytopharmaceutical company back in the 1970s and a French biopharmaceutical company were looking for substances that had unique biological properties, and they found that ginkgo had some really interesting properties, and they created the first standardized ginkgo extract, which, by the way, to this day is the most studied ginkgo extract in the world. So, for people who are drinking ginkgo leaf tea, you're wasting your time. This is a case where there's no history of prior use, no ethnobotanical use. And so here we have a modern phytopharmaceutical. And so if I have somebody and I want to use ginkgo to help enhance cognitive function in somebody who has, normal cognitive decline associated with aging, ginkgo is a good choice, but I'm going to use the standardized extract because that's the only product there's any evidence for. I know of at least 9 or 10 randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trials where ginkgo had benefit for people with normal aging-related memory loss, with early-stage dementia, helping to slow the progression of early-stage Alzheimer's. It doesn't cure Alzheimer's. It won't prevent you from eventually developing, full-blown Alzheimer's, but it did slow the progression. Also helped with some of the symptoms associated with Alzheimer's, including agitation and anxiety. I know of multiple meta-analysis, which is they take all the studies they can find and look at them and go through them, throw out the ones that are bad, and say the preponderance of evidence says that ginkgo has benefit. Yes. Is it a miracle drug? Is it a panacea? No and no. Does it have some benefit? Yes.
Lion's mane is another fascinating tree mushroom. Originally, lion's mane was studied like many of the other top mushrooms for cardiovascular health and immune system. Now that people kind of have figured out, there's more and more research coming on lion's mane. The original studies were on Japanese men, and lion's mane was shown to have, against a control group and a double-blinded placebo study, for mild cognitive impairment. So studying it on these elder Japanese people, they showed positive results in just about 16 weeks. So pretty quickly for the brain. So in just 16 weeks, every week, the Japanese men who were given lion's mane versus the group that wasn't, their memory got better and better. And then after 16 weeks, when they stopped giving lion's mane and instead gave a placebo, the results started going down. So after that study came out, which is one of the most common studies when it referred to the benefits of lion's mane, there's more and more interest on studying lion's mane for things like Parkinson and Alzheimer. I can't directly quote that that mushroom helps with either of those things, but I'm pretty convinced that there was a lot more studies on dementia-related things with lion's mane mushroom coming, and I'm curious to see what are the results of those studies. All top cultures have usually a mushroom or two that they love, but they also tend to have an adaptogenic root they love. Ginseng is the adaptogen that people talk about, but then every region has their own ginseng, like ashwagandha is the Indian ginseng, maca is the Peruvian ginseng, suma root might be the Amazonian ginseng, and in the north, the northern ginseng is rhodiola rosea. It is not a rose, but it is a very powerful herb that can be used for performance. It was used for energy. It was part of the 5 original adaptogens that Dr. Lazarov made for the Soviet army when the Western term adaptogen was made, and rhodiola was among the list of things that was studied. It was studied for skiing. How does soldiers ski in the winter? How their grip strength gets better if they take rhodiola. And then you can actually make some claims for cognitive function with rhodiola, even in European Union, which is normally very anti-claimy, because predominantly the Swedish universities studied it for like cognitive boost and how rhodiola can boost brain function. Funny enough, usually things that are good for stress are also good for the brain, because if your body's calm, you think smarter. If things are good for the brain, your physical performance, strength, power, speed gets better. So usually these are always in a link. So some of the best herbs like ashwagandha for stress might be good for brain. Something that is good for energy like rhodiola can also be good for brain power, so there's linkages. So rhodiola is definitely like one of the most studied adaptogens, one of the most culturally important for me. So I highly recommend looking into rhodiola as one of your common tools in your toolbox for better life.
I hope you're enjoying tonight's episode. We'll get right back into it in a second, but I wanted to take a quick moment to tell you how you can own the entire series. Below this video, you'll find a link to the full Proven docuseries as well as a bunch of powerful bonuses that you can bring into your home at a special discounted price. This also includes a Proven companion guidebook that's jam-packed with powerful takeaways and action items from each episode. It's loaded, deep dive wisdom that isn't included in our free premiere. If you're interested in bringing these powerful Proven healing solutions into your life, it's well worth checking out. Plus, the proceeds from your purchase will help us on our quest to unveil new breakthrough medicines and share this information with the world. Make sure to check it out. Now, back to tonight's episode. All right, now it's time for us to switch gears from the ancient herbal medicines we just covered and dive into a cutting-edge healing technology called photobiomodulation. Say that one 3 times. Photobiomodulation is a process through which a tiny amount of light, visible and invisible, is pulsed into the body using a wearable device. For the purposes of this episode, we're going to focus on a specific application called brain photobiomodulation. Wait, how could small and extremely safe amounts of light flashing on the outside of your skull have an effect on your cognitive function and benefit the most dire brain diseases of our time, like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's? Well, as scientists have known for over a century, our brain is an electrical switchboard that generates certain frequencies to perform certain functions, and by delivering pulses of light to specific regions of the brain, we can create dramatic improvements in the way it operates. Are you ready? Here we go.
There has been a wealth of literature into using low-level laser therapy, or sometimes called photobiomodulation. Starting from the 1960s, it was really widely used in the former USSR and China and other places in Eastern Europe. And over the decades, they've really honed down into very particular light frequencies that are useful for certain things.
So it turns out the light does enter the cranium, and particularly certain wavelengths of infrared light are particularly effective in getting through the skull as well as the water and affecting the cells. So those certain wavelengths of light are called the therapeutic window. And if you use those wavelengths of light on the brain, you get beneficial effects and healing effects on brain tissue.
In photobiomodulation, where we talk about the effects on the body, the cells, we depend on the activity of the cells, the mitochondria particularly, in producing ATP.
The mitochondria have what are called an electron transport chain. You take an electron here and it goes through this sequence of proteins, basically. And out the other end comes what we call ATP. And it's a highly charged chemical molecule, but it's made in the mitochondria, and they're electrical.
And the mitochondria becomes receptive to red and near infrared if you can deliver this wavelength to the mitochondria. In photobiomodulation, that's why we're usually talking about red to near infrared light. Now the next trick, of course, is delivering that at the right power.
All right, so it's the V-Light headset, goes in your head like this and covers parts of the default mode network.
When you are resting, doing self-reflection, doing nothing, not performing a task, your brain gets into this default mode network. It's called default for a reason. It just falls back on this particular network. There are some studies that shows that this is a time where the brain is doing some cleaning up work, restoring its proper functioning. And then the default mode network, the health of it is related to so many conditions. Parkinson's disease, chronic pain, schizophrenia. The health of it seems to be important. So it is logical that for me, if I'm trying to find a way to treat Alzheimer's disease, then I want to point it to the default mode network.
The light will go on your nose. You okay?
Mm-hmm.
You comfortable?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I feel very vulnerable right now.
All right. And did you notice a shift when I changed the frequency?
Mm-hmm.
What did you notice was different?
The first click was my eyes started moving back and forth very quickly and without involuntarily. And then when you clicked into the next one, that stopped, and there was a deeper, almost a sinking in kind of feeling, sinking into it.
Yeah. One question we can ask is, how come a very small amount of energy that's being put in the body, whether it's through light or microcurrent, has such major effects? If you really think about chemical reactions are, at a more fundamental level, are all electrical reactions. It's all happening through electron transfer and attraction and repulsion. So actually electricity is more fundamental than chemistry to the functioning of biology.
We get used to it as chemical because we use drugs and vitamins, which are chemicals, on the body, and they affect function. We're used to that. But the electrical part of the body is really profound and essential to our function.
So it doesn't seem surprising that intervening at an electrical level would have powerful effects. It's just that we're so stuck on this model of the body of viewing it as a bunch of chemicals, that what if we just start to view it as a bunch of electrical interactions? Then we get frequency medicine or electromedicine.
There's a lot of application for using lasers on the brain. It's been shown to help improve the communication of damaged neurons. So when neurons get damaged, they have trouble talking to each other in healthy ways. And applying this highly organized stream of photons allows them to regain that communication.
In Alzheimer's research, when you have presented symptoms, you're too late. So these are people that are written off. Nobody wants to touch them because there's nothing can be done about it. Alzheimer's is such it's an area that's very high profile, and it's also can be very political. Billions of dollars have been poured into trying to find a treatment for Alzheimer's. And just for that reason, no one's, and especially me, is going to go out there and say, hey, we have a cure for Alzheimer's. But I can say that we did some early studies. We applied actually photobiomodulation on people with Alzheimer's, and we had some really good results. There were 5 people, all the 5 people showed recovery to different levels. So that was a good indication. That was a study over 12 weeks. And what was really interesting was when we did a control, we stopped at 12 weeks and then take away the device for a month to see what happens. The first couple of guys, it just happened. When you stop, they went back into decline. Now, there are a couple of lessons from here. One is this photobiomodulation seems to work, because when it's active, it does impact. When you take away, it doesn't. But it also taught us that Alzheimer's disease is called neurodegenerative for a good reason, because it's degenerative. Your genes is creating these biomarkers, just strangling your brain cells and led on to degeneration. So when you introduce photobiomodulation, it seems to stop or maybe even, help your brain cells to recover. But when you remove that intervention, they decline. So it tells us that, you got to respect this, degenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. It could be Parkinson's disease. There's an ongoing study right now for traumatic brain injury in Boston University. The professor we're working with, Margaret Naser, had a chance to do a study on a couple of retired football players. And I know one story particularly well with Larry Carr. He went to Anne McKee, she's probably the person who is doing this research on this CTE in the brain. And she pointed him, go see Margaret Naser. So she used one of those helmets that she had in her lab. That had a lot of LEDs, and it worked. He had improvement in cognition. He was able to have his relationship again. He was able to sleep better. And then everything started to go to hell again when he stopped. And the study is over. So Dr. Naser said, go get this from V-Light. And so get a gamma. I told her to get a gamma, use on him. He started improving again. And he improved back to the level now he's normal.
We can treat the brain, cognitive problems, traumatic brain injuries, strokes.
Attention deficit disorder, there's discussion for autism, there's discussion on Parkinson's disease.
Lasers are tools that we will hopefully see everywhere in anybody who's administering healthcare in the not too distant future, because it is really so safe and so effective, and I really elegant way to interface with the body to help it function more optimally.
The number of cases that we're doing are things that 20 years ago I would never even considered. I was excited about getting to treat nerve pain. To treat somebody that hasn't been able to move a water bottle with a frequency to increase secretions in the basal ganglia, and watch him do this for the first time in 17 years. That'll change your day.
Now we're getting down to our top 2 healing modalities for brain health. Again, we arrange the countdown of our top alternative therapies using our own internal algorithm that takes into consideration A, the amount of research proving their benefits, B, the accessibility of each approach. In other words, how easy is it for anyone to try? Meaning, is it expensive? Does it require a visit to the doctor's office? Or can you do it yourself right now? And finally, is it safe? The modalities that make it into each episode score high on most, if not all, of these criteria. This next wellness breakthrough is fascinating because it combines a new advance in biofeedback, the process of electronically measuring bodily functions so we can train and improve them, with a more intuitive and deeply innate wisdom that exists within us. Sounds mysterious, doesn't it? Well, the veil is about to be lifted on a remarkable technology that is changing lives as we speak. It's called heart math, and even though the word heart is in the title, this is something that science has shown can improve overall mental health and happiness, as well as a number of other aspects of wellness in the body. We talked about the gut-brain axis in earlier episodes, but there's another term called the heart-brain axis that is absolutely vital to understanding how to live your best life. Let's dive in.
Heart math, our focus is to help people really do heart-based practices where they're activating and putting out to themselves through their cells of their body and then out into the field. And of course that harmonizes the brain and opens up higher brain perceptions. Love. It's about love and kindness, care, compassion.
We're now starting to see that there are neurobiological correlates in the body and the brain that represent states of gratitude and represent states of compassion and empathy and all these things and love that we before were just like, oh, that's just like a thing that isn't real, but it's very real. It's extremely real.
More and more studies now showing that people who have more positive outlook, positive emotions, not only live longer, but are more successful. And that's really what heart math is really about, is providing people simple tools and techniques to self-regulate and choose their emotional diet in the moment.
The neural traffic between the heart and brain, 90% of it is called afferent, which means the heart talking to the brain, telling the brain how the body feels, telling the brain what to do. And the brain, which is this incredible computer and pattern matching, is looking for the quality of the signals from the heart.
The heart really does have its own type of intelligence, even at the neural level. And it wasn't me that gave the name heart brain. That was one of the leaders in the neurocardiology field, termed the intrinsic nervous system in the heart brain, or the brain in the heart. And that's not a metaphor, because the intrinsic cardiac nervous system is a very complex system that goes to almost every major neural system in the brain, direct neural pathways. It's amazing when you map it out. The amygdalas are the part of our brain, most people have heard of the amygdalas, right? Involved in really emotional states and behaviors and so on. Cells in the core nucleus of the amygdala, or two, right, one on each side of the brain, are literally synchronized to the heartbeat. So every time the heart beats, the cells in the core nucleus fire in unison with it. So whatever these rhythmic patterns of the heart are is directly being monitored by the amygdala.
When we were researching how do we find how the heart-brain nervous system communicate, Doc Childrey, our founder, said, look at the spaces between the heartbeats, because information is transmitted in between pulses and rhythms and spaces. We realized, well, fetal monitors look at something called heart rate variability.
Most people know what heart rate is, which is how many times does our heart beat in a minute. And we call that in beats per minute, like 60, 70, 80, whatever that is. But in reality, in a healthy person, a resilient person, our heart rate actually changes with each and every heartbeat. And that's called heart rate variability. So to measure that, you have to measure the time between each consecutive pair of heartbeats quite accurately. The time between each pair of heartbeats is always varying, hence heart rate variability. And this is a very different measure than heart rate. as it turns out, we have more of this intrinsic variability, the amount of it that's occurring when we're young, and it decreases as we age, almost in a linear relationship. In fact, we can measure how much variability you have in the lab, and if you're on a healthy aging trajectory, tell with about 2 years how old you are. We now know that one of the chief reasons that your variability would be lower than it should be, the amount of it for our age, is stress. It's long-term chronic stress. I'm not talking about we had a bad day stress. So basically that depletes our nervous system, and that's reflected in lowered variability or flexibility. And as it turns out, there's pretty strong correlations between the amount of flexibility in our nervous system, which is reflected in heart rate variability, and our cognitive flexibility and our emotional flexibility. So that's the how much part of HRV, which is obviously important, but there's even a deeper level of information you can get about, especially current state from HRV, that's kind of independent of how much we have. And that is the pattern, what I call the pattern of the rhythm.
And when we began to explore that and do what's called fast Fourier transforms on the pattern of heart rate variability, when people are in different emotional states, voila, we were able to see the different frequencies.
What you see is a very chaotic looking heart rhythm pattern. Well, that's what's associated with what I call depleting emotions.
So when you're angry, frustrated, stressed, your HRV pattern can be very jagged and irregular.
Right, frustration, impatience, right, anxiety, overwhelm, those feelings, right? That's being reflected in a chaotic activity in our nervous system, which shows up in these chaotic heart rhythms.
And when you're feeling love, genuine care, appreciation, kindness, the qualities of the heart that all the ancient traditions and religions have talked about, that HRV pattern, not the amount of HRV that everybody talks about now, but the pattern over time of the rhythm, becomes very smooth and sine wave-like. Think of the heart signaling this incoherent feeling to the brain, and the brain responding with fight, flight, fright, and sending a signal back to the heart to speed up heart rate. So they're like talking to each other, and our familiar emotional patterns, when we perceive something as a threat, the brain is signaling the heart, and the heart's responding, and the heart sends the signal back to the brain. So we have this loop. And when this loop becomes a stress loop, it gets imprinted in the amygdala and the patterns in the brain, and then we look for what's familiar as what's comfortable. And that's how we can get stuck in anxiety and depression, and that can feed on itself like a vicious cycle.
The important part to understand here is what the brain wants is a pattern match. When there's a match between the familiar and the current, that equals comfort. In fact, for some people, even trying to experience and feel something positive, like appreciation, is very uncomfortable because they don't have a familiar reference that matches to.
So a key intervention is help people learn to self-regulate the autonomic nervous system, shift the heart rhythm, shift the signal the heart's sending the brain, which facilitates the higher brain, higher cortical functions to have more compassion and care, and open up to new perceptions so that you can free yourself from the problematic feedback loop. And we replicated this over and over and over, and then developed the heart math techniques or refined them.
We developed a series of tools and techniques called the heart math system. So there's about 8 core techniques that all have different applications, whether it's increasing our intuition or just managing stress, right, or overcoming health challenges, and a number of certification programs.
And we used to go around major corporations. We were doing inner quality management training programs in the 90s because TQM, or total quality management, was a big soft skill training then. So we would go and explain the published research on that heart rhythm change and emotional state that was published in the American Journal of Cardiology. We would go in with these big pieces of lab equipment and invite people to come up to the stage and recall some time they were angry or frustrated and stressed, and the whole room would see their HRV pattern get really chaotic. Then we would teach them the quick coherence technique, and they would do that, and in less than a minute, it would start to smooth out and go into that beautiful sine wave mode. So HeartMath's become very famous for this iconic graph of frustration, anxiety, worry pattern to appreciation, love, care pattern.
Biofeedback is a technique by which you monitor what happens inside your body using all kinds of equipment or whatever, and you display it back to yourself so you can see what is happening inside in your physiology. It makes the invisible visible. It works out as you can train people to increase that heart rate variability, which is really an indicator of a balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic system. So we should not only want to be activated all the time, the sympathetic side, nor do we want to be all regenerating all the time. Instead, you want to have the ability to go both ways, up and down.
So we popularized learning how to shift heart rhythm patterns. When you're frustrated, how do you shift quickly to, maybe you can't shift to frustration to bliss, but you can shift to a neutral inner balance state.
We introduced the first biofeedback technology for heart rhythm coherence to actually measure that and developed algorithms. So we actually invented at HeartMath the HRV biofeedback industry. We were the first to do that and the first to have a consumer device to do that.
You can shift heart rhythm pattern to find something in your life you appreciate that neutralizes that chaotic, incoherent rhythm.
Is more like sports training or learning to play a musical instrument than by taking a pill. That's the big difference. It's like if I want to become a violinist, I can't take a pill to become a good violinist. What I have to do is I go to a teacher, they teach me how to hold the violin, how to play. I need motivation, and then I practice. And the more I practice with intent, the more successful I'll become. And almost everybody can become an okay player. That's true in biofeedback just as much. You need to learn the skill, that's called skill acquisition, and then you need to learn to integrate it into your world. And people do this in sports as well. For example, in soccer, that if you really have a competition and you work out, then the question is on Monday, how hard should you practice? You can look at heart rate variability of the specific player. If for them the heart rate variability is less, that means you need to recover more.
We have over 15,000 pre and post normed and validated assessments, and they show tremendous results, like an average 40% decrease in anxiety, 30% improvement in sleep, similar drop in fatigue, similar improvement, 50% improvement in depression. And that's correlated with improvement in stress symptoms like indigestion and headaches, and there's a cascade effect. So that's just our research, which has been published in many peer-reviewed journals. There are over 400 independent published papers based upon HeartMath's research and findings in respected journals that are showing the application of HRV coherence. A lot of our work over the last 25 years has been, how do we language this for the classroom, where it doesn't throw people off as some woo-woo new age thing? How do we language it for the street? And the street is law enforcement, the military, the general consumer, the mother who's all stressed out. Nurses have been one of the biggest champions because they go into nursing from a genuine heart-based care, and then they tend to get overstressed.
So there are many, many thousands now of physicians and healthcare centers that have certified practitioners in HeartMath for people with health challenges.
And there are a number of devices on the market which people can buy and use, where you can now get feedback on your smartphone and to see how is your heart rate doing.
You can also read a book. We have many different ways for people to learn these tools and techniques.
I hope the last segment on HeartMath resonated with you. I know it did for us. Okay, are you ready for number one? So we've covered a lot of territory tonight, mixing together a bunch of different approaches, but this one might really surprise you. Many of us have heard about this paradigm of healing, thinking, and being. Heck, it's thousands of years old, and potentially even older, depending on who you ask. It's called mindfulness, and one thing's for sure, the research on this practice's brain benefits is through the roof, from institutions like Harvard, Johns Hopkins, and Stanford. You know, the biggies. According to many top researchers, this is the most easy and effective upgrade you can give to your brain and your life. Do you know what the top performing humans on the planet have in common? I'm talking about the Bill Gateses and Warren Buffetts of the world. They all meditate. Yeah, I know, this has been seen as the thing that only spiritual folks do. Something that you might be avoiding or saying, very cool, but it's not for me. Once you experience what meditation can do to your mind and overall health, it becomes very clear to almost everyone why this practice has been used by civilizations around the world for millennia. Meditation and overall mindfulness are self-mastery tools that can truly change your life.
The brain and meditation have this beautiful connection. When we go into meditation, it accentuates the alpha waves, which is the relaxation state. And it's immediate when it starts to happen. And because we're going in, what we're doing is we're creating this relaxation. The brain waves and frequencies are starting to increase within us. And then the neuroplasticity of the brain starts to occur.
In a nutshell, neuroplasticity is this amazing ability of your nervous system and brain to change its structure. And when you change the structure of your brain, you can change its function. And when you change the function of your brain, you literally change the way you see yourself in the world around you.
Right, so our brain creates these new neural pathways when we go into meditation. So if our nervous system is in fight or flight, we're activating the back part of our brain, which is the reptilian part of our brain. It's the most animal and the most primal of our brain. And what that does is that makes us act more animal-like, more instinctual, if we're going to fight, if we're going to run and flee, and all of those types of things. Now, what happens when we go into meditation is the neural pathways start to shoot from the back of the brain, and they start to shoot up into the frontal lobe of the brain. And it starts to activate the frontal lobe. Now, the frontal lobe is our emotional intelligence. It starts to activate the intelligence of our emotions, our EQ. And it's on a more subtle level or a simple level of understanding the frontal lobe. It's what tells us that everything is okay.
When you focus your attention, and that's what meditative practice is, it's focus of attention. You focus your attention, the mind wanders, you bring it back, and then there's that loop that continues. Over time, you develop self-regulation of thought processes. In mindfulness meditation, it's what we call open focus meditation, and you're focused more on the flow of thought or the flow of sensation. And again, it's engaging the attention networks in the brain, in the prefrontal cortex. We now have evidence that there are connections between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system, which is the emotional brain, where you get your stress and emotion response. It's an inhibitory connection. And in fact, people who are long-term meditators, their amygdala, which is part of this emotional brain, the limbic system, actually shrinks because they're using it less. So we actually see changes not only in behavior and activity, but actually in brain structure over time as people develop these skills of emotion and stress regulation. So we're starting to understand the neurophysiology of how these practices are working, and it comes from that meditative component of the focus of attention.
That's one of the gifts of mindfulness. It allows us to pause, to take a step back, to observe, to process, to work with the impact of those things, to rest, to breathe, and then come back to life.
Meditation to me is the fundamental operating system that should be running all of our minds. It's not this thing that you do when you're freaking out. It is the way you should be.
And it's understanding if you want peace in your life, which I think we all really desire, we have to self-nurture, we have to self-care. So a mom who has 3 children, for her to keep her sanity, for her to really show up as the human being that she desires for her children, for her to really connect to her heart, for her to really not yell and lose it, she's got to take the time to stop. We all have to take the time to stop and to pause. So the brain also in meditation, it starts to activate different parts of the brain. One in particular is for memory. It starts to activate gray matter within the brain for concentration, for focus. It brings happiness. People on the outside or around you, they're the ones that notice more than you. they're the ones that come to you and they start saying, what are you doing? Your skin is glowing.
When you first start meditating or deep breathing, there's quite a big barrier, which is why it's so hard to feel what it's like to enter that new state. And when you've never felt that, or you can't remember what that feels like, it's harder to get yourself back there. The more you do something, the better you get at it and the stronger the neural connections happen.
It's got to be a daily practice. It's something you have to work at. Right? I got to work out. I have to meditate every day. And for me, it's a question of sanity. It's just basic sanity. Right? I've got to sit down and put my timer on. I've got to put my timer on and sit down in a quiet space and do my meditation, do my contemplation. And if I don't do that, I know that my life's going to get out of balance really quickly. So it's a discipline.
There's an endless stream of chatter that has come with somehow the evolution of our minds to this amazing computational machine that has also made us self-aware, right? And that self-awareness, I think, is the double-edged sword that is leading to childhood suicide, depression, all the challenges that we're having in our modern society, and our ability to use this amazing computational brain to, put satellites in orbit and do the things that we've done as a species. But I think when you throw the baby out with the bathwater and you take the computational higher order systems of the brain and you don't put enough time and energy into the self-awareness and the self-reflective capacity, the brain starts to take off without you. And you start to get behind on where the brain has gone into dangerous places. You start to not have control over your emotions or your moods and things that, people are taking drugs for nowadays.
The limit of the mind is thinking, and there's more beyond just our mundane thoughts that we have, or the thoughts of suffering that we have. And so I give that ability for us to experience the vastness and the expansion of the mind. And that's what meditation is really all about. I really recommend that people first, if in your area, try to find some sort of guidance, teacher, an expert in meditation to move in that direction. If you don't have that, then I recommend go online. There's a lot of things online that you can find that are nice priming beginnings that can get you going. I also recommend apps, right? If you really can't find anything, I don't think that's like the end all be all practice, but if you started with Headspace, that's going to be helpful. We have 1,440 minutes in one day, right? So when my students come to me, I ask for 40 minutes of that 1,440 minutes of the day. That means for 1,400 minutes, you have absolutely anything else that you want to do, right? So it's really thinking in your time management and efficiency to really understand, I think you can fit 5 minutes in.
Let's just close our eyes and focus our attention in the area of the heart. Just shift out of the head and mind to the center of the chest, the area of the heart, and pretend like your breath is flowing in through the area of the heart and out through the area of the heart. Breathe a little more slowly, a little more deeply than normal. Just find an easy rhythm that's comfortable. As you continue heart-focused breathing, activate a genuine feeling of gratitude, appreciation, kindness, care for someone or something in your life. Could be appreciation for a time in nature. Gratitude or care feeling for your pet. some uplifting feeling or joyous feeling from a time that you had an accomplishment, something that generally warms your heart. And breathe that in through the heart and out through the heart. And just feel that feeling from the core of your heart, just radiating out through your whole body and into the environment. Just know you can do this anytime, practice it anytime, in just a minute or two to reboot, reset as you move through your day and release stress and build resilience. Okay, thank you.
So what have we learned? Well, let's start with a simple fact. For every one message the brain sends to the gut sends 9 back to the brain, which begs the question, who is really calling the shots here? We have a single layer of epithelial cells lining our gut. This creates a delicate gatekeeping balance that determines who gets to come in and who doesn't. Because of the close connection between these two vital organs, if we have leaky gut, we almost by definition have leaky brain. But what disrupts the 1 cell thick lining of the gut? Well, one thing's for sure, commonly administered things like antibiotics and antacids definitely do. And when a macromolecule permeates through this epithelial layer of our gut, our immune cells go into action to determine whether it's friendly or whether it's a threat. And the tricky part is that some of the foreign bodies that permeate through this hole can mimic our own cells. For example, on gluten, there's an amino acid component that is very similar to our thyroid gland. So, when our body produces an antibody to fight that protein, it also matches our thyroid. So our immune system targets our thyroid too. This is a recipe for autoimmune disease, and it plays out all over the world. Get this. In the West, the average adult has a 50% chance of getting Alzheimer's, and the onset of the disease begins 30 years before symptoms ever show. So in our first modality, Ocean shared that one of the best treatments for inflammation, including neuroinflammation, is turmeric. The second go-to would be colostrum, which contains polypeptides that turn the brain on. He shared some observations from the doctors in Loma Linda, a blue zone where they have extraordinarily low rates of Alzheimer's, and they happen to also eat a predominantly plant diet. Functional neurologist Dr. Titus Chu told us about the importance of healthy fats in your diet, from DHA to EPA to MCT. But one of his favorites is olive oil. Key to the well-researched and proven Mediterranean diet, olive oil is rich in polyphenols and antioxidants. Check out this bit of proven herbal wisdom. The more stress a plant is under when it grows, the more stress protective molecules it produces. So source your veggies and spices smartly. They'll be better for you. Dr. Tom then shared some incredibly easy pro tips to heal your microbiome. Reducing, if not outright avoiding, unnecessary sugars and processed foods goes without saying. He also emphasized the need for root vegetables, turnips, radishes, rutabagas, sweet potatoes, carrots, and others. Eat one a day and alternate daily to get different bacteria in your gut. Pretty easy. You can bake, steam, saute, or just eat these raw. It can be that simple. The research is clear, and diverse eating is crucial for health. He then gave us some prebiotic suggestions. Prebiotics are what feeds the microbiome, and fiber is a great form for humans. Simply add Jerusalem artichokes, jicama, onions, garlic, leafy greens, and apples to your diet. Acacia fiber is also a great option. Next, add some fermented foods into there. Sauerkraut, kimchi, miso. Cultures and cuisines around the world use this ancient preparation method very often, so there are many tasty options for you to choose from. So your gut healing formula is 1 root veggie, 2 prebiotic foods, and a fermented food. That's it. We then moved into herbs and supplements and learned how ethnobotanists will often search the plant world and the way that indigenous communities interact with these plants to find new medicines. Then, Taro shared the herbal knowledge from growing up in Finland, where things like sea buckthorn, nettles, and rhodiola are more commonplace. Rhodiola especially has been well studied and was already known to the Vikings as they used this to prepare for battle. David Winston, who wrote the book on adaptogens, said that although pharmaceutical companies seek out an active ingredient that can be patented, the reality is that a single herb has dozens, if not hundreds, of active ingredients. He told us about the ginkgo biloba leaf as a standardized extract for brain health. Science indicates that this slows the progression of Alzheimer's. Another herb, lion's mane, is also a top brain-boosting mushroom, with Japanese studies showing improvement of cognitive impairment in just 16 weeks. We also learned about adaptogens like ginseng, ashwagandha, and suma root. Then, we explored how light stimulates your brain. Photobiomodulation is the application of various light spectrums to the body. When aimed at the brain, the effects can be incredible. We spoke with a few folks from V-Light who pioneered intranasal photobiomodulation to shine light to the base of the brain. Their research, in collaboration with top universities, has contributed to dramatic improvements in Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, TBI, and other brain-related disorders. Your body is electrical and chemical in nature, but the bioelectricity precedes or comes before your biochemistry. So these light frequencies from photobiomodulation alter the electricity in your body to influence the material elements of who you are. As seen after 12 weeks of photobiomodulation, or PBM as they would call it, Alzheimer's patients showed recovery from neurodegeneration, which is not an easy thing to do. Their brain was somehow able to regenerate itself. Wow. After that, we met with the HeartMath Institute, an organization who gave rise to the field of heart rate variability, a type of biofeedback, with their decades of research into this aspect of the body. Get this, 9 out of 10 messages between the heart and the brain come from the heart and go to the brain. The heart actually has its own nervous system, separate from the central nervous system, and the heart-based techniques and research we explored show that positive outlook, meditation, and breathing all influence our brainwaves. Heart rate variability is another way to say the beat-to-beat changes in your heart rate. This measurement expresses your ability to adapt and recover. And it also measures the function in our body that allows us to stay in parasympathetic dominance, or the desirable rest and digest state. And finally, our number 1 healing solution was meditation and mindfulness. The term neuroplasticity means the remarkable ability of your brain to reshape itself, and meditation literally remolds a better brain for you. Research has conclusively shown that meditation releases GABA, a chemical related to feelings of tranquility and calm, as well as serotonin, a natural mood stabilizer. Mindfulness is a science-backed gift that has a laundry list of health benefits, too many to list here. Once outright rejected, the data on the brain benefits of mindfulness and meditation is so strong that this is now implemented into most Fortune 500 companies, professional organizations, elite athletic teams, and the hospital system. Whew, we learned a lot in that episode, didn't we? Okay, 2 more things before we go. 1, make sure to click the button below this video to find out how you can bring all 9 episodes of our Proven docuseries, plus a bunch of powerful bonus resources into your home for life. Every one of us deserves to know the full spectrum of healing options that are available, and the information in this series is something you will want to come back to again and again whenever an illness arises in your circle, be it your own health or that of your family and friends. You can own the digital, the physical, or the all-access package at a special discounted price during this event only. Now is the time. Lastly, what alternative healing secrets do we have coming up next? Tomorrow night, we air episode 4, and this one's another 2-parter that covers a pair of health conditions that are intimately intertwined. I'm talking about fatigue, or just overall lack of energy, and insomnia. This is an area where alternative and complementary medicines are not just an option, but they may be the only truly effective answer. All of us need more energy. This is not one to miss. See you tomorrow.